Hello and welcome to the first instructional video brought to you by SG Percussion. Please excuse if this video's production quality is not that good. This is my first real go at a instructional video. So what I'm going to be talking about today is I'm going to be talking about an introduction to the steel pan. And steel pan is a very awesome instrument. It is one of the relatively new innovations in the percussion world, and I think it's something that everyone should really at least be exposed to as a percussionist, because these instruments are so unique, and the way that they're treated, especially in their founding country, is awesome. I mean, the culture around steel pan is kind of what makes it awesome, and it's just about having a good time. So I'm at UMass Dartmouth today. I'm going to be going over some really basic things about basic steel pan technique, how to set them up, how to play some simple things. There's a technique involved, and also a little bit of the history. So I guess let's start with a little bit of the history of the steel pan. So it's really it's debatable whether steel pans where they originated. A lot of people, if you go on like a cruise or something, they'll anywhere in the Caribbean, they'll be like, oh, the steel drum was invented here. Generally, steel drums, yes, that's what they are. They're drums, but they're not. I don't usually call them steel drums unless I'm talking to someone that doesn't exactly know what they are. If I just say, oh, I play the pan, someone goes, huh? And the sound is a very unique sound. It's something that, people have, it's a unique sound that people, they associate with the Caribbean. So it's just like, even my instructor, he said he went to Hawaii or something, and they said, oh, steel pans were invented here. That's wrong. Steel pans were really innovated in the country of Trinidad. Trinidad and Tobago, because those countries just kind of both kind of mash together. There are subtle differences, but it is two small Caribbean islands. Trinidad mostly, especially its capital, the port of Spain. That's where some of the main steel pan innovators lived. And a little bit of the history is steel pans were used just originally. They would take oil drums, and there was a huge slave population on the islands, especially when they were colonized by the British, because the British brought African American slaves over to work and harvest the sugar cane on the sugar plantations, much like in the Americas. The slaves were working on these plantations, and much like they did in America, they found ways to integrate their traditional African rhythms and things into the Trinidadian culture and into the culture of the island. So if you go there now, there's definitely a huge African American influence, as well as a Caribbean one. So it creates a real interesting mix of people. In Trinidad, they observe Carnival. And much like in Brazil, where it's Brazilian samba bands marching down the street in a parade sort of style, the same thing would be going on in Trinidad with a lot of these bands that would just kind of grab whatever they could to make sounds with. So basically they would grab metal pots and pans, much like little kids do. I remember banging on pots and pans as a little kid. They would grab anything they could play. And mostly these musicians that would march in these bands would be from the poor sections, and like I said, some slaves, but it was mostly poor or like kids from the urban environment that really didn't have musical instruments to play. So they would march down the street and bang on these pots and pans, and they didn't really have any specific sound. They didn't have any kind of pitch yet. They were basically just hitting metal. But through this, they played a lot of their traditional, I said African rhythms, African-inspired rhythms, mixed with definitely the calypso style that was getting popular around the Caribbean. and slowly through time they found that they could get pitches out of the metal by manipulating it. And the first steel bands were actually part of a group um, that they also hit bamboo sticks on the ground called tambu bamboo. This is a rain stick, but you kind of get the idea. This is ignore the beads, but this was what they would use just as like percussive sounds to make as they were marching to kind of keep the beat. So during Carnival in Trinidad, tambu bamboo bands would utilize metal oil drums as a way to incorporate that metallic sound. They really liked the sound of the metal, and you could use them much as like they would use drums in Africa to kind of interlock rhythms and such. And then they started noticing that they could get different pitches by manipulating the metal using special hammers. Now, usually by making indents in the metal, they would get pitches out of them. Not specific pitches, and not Western pitches, definitely not. They were very, very primitive, and they were astounded that they could get any kind of pitch besides just the metallic clang out of it. I mean, even that, yes, it has a pitch, but it doesn't have like a definite like tonal sound to it. The main person to innovate them to basically modern day, like what the steel pan is like today, is a guy named Elie Manet. And Elie was from Trinidad, from Port of Spain, and he wanted to figure out how to make these drums melodic. And so he came to America and he studied Western music theory. And then he brought what he had learned back to Trinidad, and through trial and error, he quit school and in his backyard just started banging on oil drums to try to get definite Western pitches. And so what we hear today as the Western 12-note scale, over time, it took a long time, but he eventually created something that sounded exactly like the 12-note chromatic scale. And obviously, the method of tuning is very, very specific. It's something I don't want to go into yet, especially because I don't really know the specifics of it yet. But it's basically using specialized hammers. They use a concave. Structure. Like I said, this is a bowl, and they would make indentations in the metal to basically create these bumps that give you a definite pitch. So yeah, and then eventually, after Elie just kind of perfected his method of tuning these to a 12-tone pattern, he ended up with a chromatic scale. So definitely what Elie did was very, very important to the steel drumming world. And what he did also was create 4 main pans that could be used in a format such as, if you're ever in a chorus, SABT style, SATB style, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And he created 4 different drums for technically those 4 different voices. And through that, he was able to create a steel band with a very wide range of pitch sets. So it's exactly like a chorus of human voices, where he could create whole bands with just using steel pans and then drums for rhythm. And then he could have all different parts.